We know what Kevin McCarthy and House Republicans plan to do with their new majority next year. Investigations, investigations, and more investigations. It's not just Hunter Biden's laptop and red meat culture wars. There is one actual policy issue the GOP will talk about, albeit in their own narrow, simplistic, and xenophobic way: the border.
Together we bear witness to the worst border crisis in the U.S. history. President Joe Biden and the Democrats running Congress has pushed open border policies and waged baseless attacks on our border agents. If Secretary Mayorkas does not resign, House Republicans will investigate every order, every action, and every failure. Will determine whether we can begin impeachment inquiry.
Well, in a weird way, McCarthy is kind of right. There is a lot to investigate on the immigration front. In fact, just days after McCarthy's press conference in Texas, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, said they accidentally posted the names, birth dates, nationalities, and detention locations of more than 6,000 immigrants who claim to be fleeing torture and persecution. They posted those to their website. It was readily available where anyone could see it. The LA Times reports that the agency learned of the error only when a human rights group alerted them to it. The agency mistakenly posted the data during a routine update of its website, including data from migrants who had fled brutal regimes in Russia, China, and Iran. ICE told the LA Times it will not deport immigrants whose information it mistakenly posted until it is determined whether the disclosure affects their cases. Yeah, that's cold comfort. An unnamed ICE official speaking to the Times called the disclosure embarrassing and potentially dangerous to the thousands of outed migrants. It's just the latest of a series of embarrassing and potentially dangerous acts by the government agencies tasked with protecting the border. You know about the Trump administration's child separations policy and Remain in Mexico policy, the latter of which was ended by the Biden administration. But you might have missed some more recent immigration-related scandals, like the report from the NGO Freedom for Immigrants in October on abuse of black immigration detainees. It found that while black migrants make up 6% of all detainees, they accounted for nearly a third of all abuse reports in immigration detention. An ICE spokesman said that, quote, personnel are held to the highest standards of professional and ethical behavior, and when a complaint is received, it is investigated thoroughly. A month before that came the news that Customs and Border Protection agents, CBP agents, are downloading data from thousands of Americans' phones, tablets, and computers seized at border crossings, and holding on to that data for 15 years at a time, data that a number of staff can access during that time without a warrant, according to a briefing agency staff gave to Congress over the summer. And in September, a Customs and Border Patrol Twitter account in West Texas started sharing posts by Trump aide Stephen Miller, the far-right architect of the child separation policy, posts in which he claimed, among other things, that Joe Biden had ended the United States' constitutional government. The Department of Homeland Security later shut down that account and condemned the tweets. An investigation is ongoing. Yet another probe of a cabinet department that has spent its entire two-decade existence under investigation for possible fraud, abuse, and mismanagement by the Government Accountability Office, as The Verge recently reported. It consistently has the lowest morale of any federal agency, with more than 1,000 employees, according to the Federal Employee Viewpoint Survey. Even for someone who is kind of cynical, it was shocking, said John Roth, a former DHS Inspector General under Obama. You do a little scratching, and there was just rot underneath. Investigate that, Kevin McCarthy. But it's hard to imagine that he will. This is the Republican Party that warns ahead of every election that a caravan of dangerous migrants is approaching our border. This is the party that stood by a president who separated children from their parents, stole children from their parents in the name of deterrence. Why do we think they'd now launch investigations into abuse? But we also have to ask, where are the Democrats? What happened to those on the left in particular who used to say abolish ICE? You don't really hear about that anymore. In fact, right now, Senate Democrats are desperately trying to seal a bipartisan immigration deal before the GOP House sweeps in. A compromise that would open a path to citizenship for 2 million dreamers, yes, but would also give $25 billion in new spending to border security, and it would extend Title 42, the draconian policy that turns away migrants over COVID concerns that the government doesn't really have anywhere else. And still, this bipartisan deal won't get past a lot of Republicans. As Texas Senator John Cornyn made clear, quote, I don't think there's any way we can pass immigration legislation without addressing the crisis at the border. Well, which crisis? I mean, again, in a weird way, Cornyn is right. There is a crisis at the border, but it's a crisis centered on a lack of humanity. Instead of always going on the immigration defensive, instead of accepting quote-unquote populist hatred of the other, of foreigners, of migrants, wouldn't it be great if Democrats took the lead and went on the offensive to solve this real border crisis? Joining me now is Tessa Petit, co-executive director of the Florida Immigrant Coalition, and Hamid Ali-Aziz, the LA Times' immigration policy reporter, who broke the story about ICE publishing the personal data of those 6,000 migrants. Thank you both for joining me. Tessa, when you hear Kevin McCarthy talk about a border crisis, what goes through your mind? I mean, he's right, but not in the way he thinks.
Hi, you are right. It is a crisis, but yes, it is being used with negative connotation just for political purposes. Migration has increased throughout the world, and we have a mixed flow of people who are fleeing crippling poverty and devastation, who are coming to our border to ask for safety and ask for security. What we need at our border is a better system, a better asylum system, fixing a broken immigration system to make sure that we are able to not only provide the safety and security that we're bound to do by international laws and agreements, but also that represent the country that we are. It is also a narrative that exists, that is put out there to inflame an idea of, like you said, it's the othering, right? The dangerous other that is coming as the number one enemy. It is not a crisis. It is actually an opportunity for us to not only improve our work, it is a test to us to improve the way we receive people in need. It is also an opportunity for us to welcome folks who are looking for work, who are looking for a better life. And It is also our opportunity to face the crisis that is happening around the world due to climate migration. These are not the enemies that are coming at our borders. Far from that.
Yes.
This is not a crisis. This is all about the way we are set up and not doing what we're supposed to do.
Hamid, you've been a one-man scoop machine on immigration policy for many years now, and the latest was that story about ICE putting the data of 6,200 immigrants fleeing torture and persecution online. What is the latest on that story? How does the U.S. government even begin to make restitution to these people?
ICE is reaching out to all of these 6,000 people who've had their information leaked and trying to make sure they understand what happened and they have an opportunity to raise it in their cases. You know, where it goes from there is really dependent on, you know, how the courts handle this, how attorneys who are representing these immigrants handle the situation, and whether or not, you know, ICE is able to, you know, continue to monitor, you know, their situations.
And Hamid, with all your years of experience covering ICE, CBP, Border Patrol, when we hear about abuses of detainees or about ICE agents, say, raiding a business in Tennessee and cuffing and abusing more than 100 Latino workers on the mere suspicion that they were undocumented, as occurred in August, is this the work of a few bad actors, or is there institutional rot here?
Well, I think one thing that's important to note is that what the Biden administration has tried to do is really rein in some of this enforcement to limit the type of enforcement ICE is doing. You saw that they, you know, issued these arrest priorities, the types of people ICE officers should go and arrest. And with that, the number of arrests went down, the detention numbers were going down. You know, they got rid of family detention. These policy changes have made a pretty big impact, I would say. You know, you don't see quite as many stories revolving around ICE scandals and, you know, situations where, you know, we saw more of, frankly, during the Trump administration. So I think there has been a lot that this administration has tried to do. Ultimately, as we see in the Supreme Court, some of these efforts are under attack, and, you know, whether or not these priorities can remain at ICE, that's going to be up to the Supreme Court.
And Tessa, what happened to abolish ICE It took off as a slogan, a mantra during the Trump administration amid the family separation policy. Seems to have just disappeared. And I wonder, how is immigration going to play in the 2024 election going forward, given Democrats seem to always be on the defensive?
As you said earlier, the whole principle is not to be on the defensive, but actually be on the offensive. And the solution to something similar to abolish ICE is the same cry we had when we said abolish the police, defunding the police, is because we're all calling for reform. We're all calling for repairs. We're all calling for improvement. What we're saying is there needs to be, yes, the way ICE functions now needs to be abolished. The way that immigrants are being treated, the way that that enforcement is being done needs to be abolished. It needs to be reformed, redone, revisited.
Yes.
And that will definitely solve the issues that we have and the concerns and pushback that the immigrant rights movement has against ICE. The institution in itself, whether it needs to remain or not, is not the question. The bigger question is, how is the Biden administration, how is our administration, how is the U.S. government going to deal with improving the way they address migration and the way they welcome immigrants in this country and the way they protect them while they're here in their custody?
And Hamid, another focus in this debate has been DHS leadership. Republicans want Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas to resign, even though they let lots of unconfirmed Trump appointees like Chad Wolf run DHS as acting secretary. Some House Republicans are threatening impeachment of Mayorkas. Last month, you interviewed Chris Magnus, the Biden-appointed progressive commissioner of Customs and Border Protection, who had been asked to resign by Mayorkas, initially refused. Magnus has since stepped down. There were reports that he was trying to change the culture there, trying to hire more women as agents. Is that why he was removed? What is going on in the Biden administration?
Well, I mean, I thought it was a pretty notable interview he gave. He said that at one point he realized that top leadership at DHS did not understand what reform looked like in a law enforcement agency. That's a pretty surprising statement from an appointee of this administration. And it feels like his resignation kind of came and went pretty quickly. And you don't see, quite as much outrage or attention to it from lawmakers, even during the questioning of Mayorkas, Secretary Mayorkas in Congress. Not many lawmakers brought it up, which was pretty surprising to me.